I'm Charlie Palmer. I'm founder of BAT, and I've invited Craig to help us with the seminar. Craig's an expert on equity release, and so he's going to help us in the seminar today, and we're going to talk about the ways that you can develop your business towards equity release and the compliance and so on around that. And Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jason Redmond. I'm the sales director at BAT. I joined about 12 months ago now, and we are progressing the BAT system, as many of you will already be familiar with through IFAC or of your own volition. We have some enormous updates coming very soon, which we'll touch on at the end. But as Charlie's already said, today is all about really testing the waters, maybe for some of you within equity release, or as we should now call it, later life lending. And that's a big part of what I want to put across. We may do this slightly differently from normal today, actually, because a lot of you will have different angles that you're coming at this from. You want confirmation about certain things, or whether it's something you want to do looking at in the future, or if you want to use a network, say, such as One Stop for Equity Release, and be a referrer to. So we thought it'd be a good idea, actually, to start this backwards and to keep things flowing nicely instead of a 20-person conversation, which gets a bit noisy. It's probably better to add questions in the chat that we can then either address when we get to the right part of the content and or address immediately if needed. So what I would say is, if you have any questions that have come to mind, or the reason why you've joined today, pop those in the chat and we can work through them. Otherwise, Craig, over to you to introduce yourself, I guess.
Right, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Jason. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. That's as you all know, an X is a has-been, a drip, a spurt's a drip under pressure. However, I joined Equity Release about 10 years ago now. I went DA about 4 years ago. We use AIR as the sourcing system for ourselves, and we're the largest firm in the UK that AIR has at the moment. So that's great. I'm going to cover things that I think you need to know if you want to get into the business, and if you want to go into equity release, in its entirety. There are areas that you need to consider. But if you want to ask me anything about equity release, how we get our business, how much we get paid, anything like that, the floor is open for that. But we'll go through the slides. But if you've got any questions, as Jason said, just holler and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Thanks very much, Jason.
Perfect. So without further ado, I think we'll hand back to Charlie and we'll go through a bit of an introduction on BAT. Again, I know a lot of you will already be aware of it, but we do find, especially from IFAC clients, where actually there's a lack of awareness maybe with a lot of the other features or functionalities within the system, and certainly on the new AI models that we now have and run. So I'll be touching on that at the end. But yeah, I shall hand back to Charlie and just shout next slide, please.
Right, next slide, please. The equity release is slightly got a slightly difficult reputation, which is unfounded to a large extent. And what's happened now is the growth in the older population and the growth in property markets compared to equity markets has completely reshaped things. So people's wealth tends to be tied up in their property far more than in shares, which and with the same cash liability requirements come up for payment for expenses of living and care in old age. Keep going, Jason. So we can talk about this forward so that you can explain yourself to regulators, and that all relates to compliance and record keeping. So the FCA expectations are it's really, you've got to get ahead of the game as what exactly you're doing, because they see it as a high risk business, and so you've got to know what they're going to ask and how you're going to deal with it when you're in the equity release world. And it's not just them, it's the counterparties you deal with, the lenders and providers and so on. Everybody wants to know how are you on top of vulnerable clients. You're dealing with people who may be heading towards, and so you need to know that and get ahead of it and deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to get what a lot of firms get, which which grow. Equity release is a huge growth area. Okay, there's no doubt about it. It's a bull market, and they're going to slap you with a letter saying, "Stop where you are while we look at your business, and you're dead in the water because they won't let you take on new clients." The VREC, we did a slide on VRECs, voluntary requirements. They've just exploded. Okay, so the FCA all the time are just writing to firms saying stop while we get a hold of your controls. All very well for them to say, but we've all got to make a living. So you've got to get ahead of that and be aware that it may be coming down the track. And of course, you just don't know. It's an email that lands at 5 o'clock on a Friday generally, and it's well published actually with the public companies. They do publish them and say, well, we've been ordered to look at our controls. So what the FCA are looking at is usual buzzwords: data lakes, systems, controls. Let's see, they're continuing. All they ever talk about is data nowadays, it seems to me anyway. And they want to see you being on top of your data and being able to show it to them, because you can now with better systems and so on, including from that. Because you can, they're asking even more for it. And we've had several inquiries for very large firms, basically saying we want. Basically, it appears that it's come out of an FCA letter. Sort of somehow or other they sheepishly admit that they want 100% file checking, which is well, it's unimaginable 20 years ago. And there was a benchmark of 10%, which has sort of slipped to, most firms do 10 to 20% now. And that's an unwritten rule, not written down anywhere. It's just generally speaking where people have got to, is what you can manage as a firm, but they're pushing that, and there's no doubt about it, and they're pushing that to 100%. So with the very large firms, so obviously you're not generally very large firms attending, but you can only imagine that it's coming your way. They want to see the KPIs. They want to see the inevitable 2025 is the year of the anti-money laundering checks. If you're like me, you spend a good couple of hours every day in business just verifying your ID for almost everybody seems to want it in different ways. So we use Yoti, other people use Experian. I think Yoti is attached to a bit of Experian. We had an experience with Experian, not a very happy one. But anyway, there's various electronic checkers, and there's other ones which IFAs and brokers use, which help doing it electronically. Criminal record checks, in my opinion, well, probably best not to give my opinion, but people declare it when they join a firm, but the FCA expect you to double check it. People declare that they haven't got a criminal record, and then the FCA expect you to go behind their backs and find out if that's true or not. Basically, you may as well bring a lie detector into the office, if you ask me. But anyway, that's by the by. It does I guess pick up 1 in 100 cases of people who have got a criminal record check, and of those, I guess 1 in 10 of them hasn't declared it when they possibly should have done. So they want to see analysis of complaints, T&C testing. I'm going to go through all these later. Just keep rolling it now, Jason. So we're going to show you all of these and how you can do that within BAT very shortly, how you can record your CPD, how you can keep central records going, and the IT you will need vulnerable clients is, well, that's the theme of 2026. We've got a very simple thing here on BAT. On the client list, when you add clients, it just comes up with a flag. Okay, does the customer show characteristics of vulnerability? And bingo, you've got a little box there which says yes, and that's driven by and again that's in the workflow users of BAT will be familiar with, and that's driven by a very simple questionnaire. When you upload a client, it just you press a button and it says, oh, I'm just answering these questions. Those are the questions in a pop-up. Does the customer show very simple, I've written that. Does the customer show characteristics of vulnerability in any way, shape, or form? If the answer is yes, then you just have to deal with it. You know, it's a bit like a conflict of interest. It's not a yes or a no. It's how you manage that piece of information. So that's sort of putting well, vulnerable clients to bed, which obviously in equity release tend to be the older generations, not exclusively. Craig will talk a bit more about that, I think, a bit later on. Jason, do you want to mention anything about the reports, the back looking reports that you pull off the back of of any system which you use. We obviously sell that, which is central, which brings all the data together in the same system, which is our big thing, if you like. But even large firms many of them have got data all over the place in lots of different areas, and they're having to cobble it together all the time, which is what's driving inquiries to us.
Yeah, that's true. We're seeing, well, I wouldn't say desperation yet, but it's probably going to get to that soon because of the fractured nature of people's data, whether it's in an old filing cabinet, on Excel, on Word, in someone's brain. We do come across a wide spectrum of clients where there's, that disparate amount of information is stored in different places. So, the buzzword we are starting to use and generate ourselves at the moment is centralized compliance. So we have a wide net of compliance. So everything from the business book, which can track NTUs and cancellations, and the KPI trend of that advisor only ever sells that product and never this one. And
yeah, just hold it there on that side, because there was a Twitter reel which did the rounds, and now generated 1 million views within a day of somebody just saying, look, where is the brains of a business, And at the moment, or in the old days, so to speak, it's all held with old so-and-so at the front desk or him at the back desk, so to speak. But somehow or other, the brains of the business is increasingly becoming the software or the computer or the meeting point where you're using it. That's a screen we use to monitor people's risk. Jason, can you explain that?
Yeah, so again, this effectively is pulling together various sources of information across KPI trends, NTUs, cancellations, file checking outcomes, advisor behaviours, and internal, things such as complaints and breaches. So again, that's the centralised nature of BAT, is that all of those things are held and stored within one unit that every stakeholder can access to their own level. So whether they be advisors, admins, paraplanners, compliance managers, directors, it doesn't really matter. There's a limited view on what your role allows you to do, but all of that disparate information pulls together is director and compliance manager level, is you can get a full risk report which gives you an intimated audit outcome. So pre-FCA, you knock on the door effectively.
I think a lot of people use that for monitoring their appointed representatives, so it gives each one a discrete score, or indeed their RIs.
Yeah, and that's we have a lot of networks using BAT and companies such as Craig's at One Stop. So I think that the overview you get, it's like anything with risk reporting. Do you want to find out 3 months after it's happened, or do you want to know in real time? And it is like any other, BAT I know is a unicorn really in terms of it's a CRM, and it's a business book, and it's a compliance engine, and it does various things. But what it does give you, if it's used by all of the stakeholders in real time, as it should be, which is rare, I know, for advisor bases, especially to upload their CRM in real time and update things as they go. Normally it's an end of the week job, and that's a behavioural thing. But if you do, even if it is a weekly update, what you do get is, in that case, would be semi-real-time alerts and reporting to tell you you've got a problem that you need to deal with quickly before it becomes a real issue and an FCA-related issue or something worse. So absolutely, utilising more of that and what it can do, again, brings to life all of the back end in terms of reports and MI. And as Charlie said, that is becoming, if not number one requirement. We run RFPs for major companies, some of the biggest in the industry, and the quality and the speed of the MI that they can get their hands on is probably always number 2 or 3 in the risk list. But again, it's like I've already said, if you're not putting the data in there, you're getting nothing at the back end either. So Charlie's already said it, the FCA is now almost completely a data-led company. So if you cannot satisfy their data requirements, you cannot prove your company is under control. It's as simple as that to them now, and then you will get a knock on the door. Sorry, Charlie.
Of course, the big thing is what the FCA expects. That's what everybody's sort of in the sister company IFAC, a lot of people say, what they want to hear. Not quite like that, but Craig, do you have any sense of what the FCA actually expect you to say, so to speak, when they're talking?
Well, to be honest, I don't understand the language they use when I do speak to them. But all joking aside, they have. I was in Mauritius a few weeks ago, and they speak English and French. I'm fine with that, and Creole, and the FCA speak Creole. It's just an incredible language. I don't mean to mean light of it, but really, I've said on more than one occasion, that's fantastic. Could you explain that to me again, or ask the question in a different manner, please? But Jason, you're right, and Charlie, you're right. It's all about data. I've got a quote that I was going to say later on, but I'll say it now. That in the great film called A Few Good Men, where Commander Joanne Galloway is talking to Lieutenant what's his name? It's gone straight out of my head. But anyway, Kathy, which is Tom Cruise, and he says it doesn't matter what I know; it only matters what I can prove. And the FCA are all about that data. What can you prove? Have you embedded it? How can you prove you've embedded it? How has it improved? And how can you prove that you've improved? And that's all data, I'm afraid, which is very sad, but it is all data. So
Yeah, it's not easy, is it?
And as you said, they're moving to 100% file checks. They want, because we grew so quickly, 1,000% growth in 3 years. Obviously, there was a target on my back, and yes, I was asked to go into London, and I sort of chatted to them, and I was given a voluntary undertaking, not the voluntary requirement, but that was released. It took 10 months. I wasn't allowed to recruit for 10 months. They've now released that. For good measure, they put a VREC on my website for a few months, but they're now looking to take that off. So you're right, they do throw things at you, but there's a great expression: if you're walking through hell, just keep going. And that's a bit what it's like with the FCA. They keep on throwing things at you. They make life very difficult, but you have to just grin and bear it and move on, which we are doing. So happy to answer any of those questions.
You just keep going.
Keep going.
I remember that on a Friday before a bank holiday.
It's a good one.
We're nearly at the other side, yes.
Absolutely.
There we go.
So,
We're going to hand over to you now, Craig.
So are we at my slides? Wow,
We are.
that went quite quickly. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything on this slide. If you go to the first slide, it's talking about what I want to talk to you about really is if you do get involved in equity release, and I would say there's a little bit of repetition of what's gone earlier, but of course repetition is the mother of learning, so I don't think that's a problem. But if you're going to get involved in equity release, then here are some of the areas that you'll need to consider, and many of which we've touched on already. But equity release demand, continues to grow, as Charlie says. In 2022, it was 6.3 billion. And then, unfortunately, in September 22, there was a budget. Some of you remember it, by Liz Truss. As we use, our interest rates are not by the Bank of England, but the 15-year gilts, that absolutely hammered the business. Our interest rates went up from 3% to 6%. They're still around 6%. And the business is currently 2.3 billion. But if you ever wanted to look at a business that's got the growth potential, it is this one. Everyone's living longer. They are still having the same problems. They're becoming mortgage prisoners. They get to retirement, even if it's 67, and they go, I've got interest-only mortgage, and Santander wants their money back, and I'm stuck. So there's a lot of times when equity release there's no other option for them. So in that respect, yeah.
Craig, can you just talk us through what happens next with that? We want our money back.
I've had a few. I've saved people from being turfed out of their homes at the last minute. So basically, they'll write a letter, and usually most clients take the ostrich approach. They stick their head in the sand. They're in denial that there's a problem, but then they get another and another, and eventually they'll get a letter that says, if you do not pay back the £100,000, then we will repossess your property. And at that point, the children and everyone else in the family do panic, understandably. And as long as the problem is, it can be, and I've had a client talk briefly about they had to sell their property because we couldn't get enough on equity release. But what we did do was it took about 15 months, but they sold their property, they paid off the mortgage, and then the capital that they had left, we then got an equity release mortgage on the house they were going to buy, because a lot of people think equity release is only when you're in your own house and you've been in there for a certain period of time, and it is not. You can use equity release to purchase a new property. So for example, if you have £400,000 and you're both in your mid-60s and you see a house nearer your children, or you get turfed out of your old property and you want to buy something at £500,000, then you can get £100,000 mortgage on the new property you're going to get, and that together with your 400,000 means you can move into it. You can never be turfed out of it, because there is a guarantee that that can never happen. So you can upscale as well as downscale. A lot of people don't realize that. Anyway,
and so if they default on their debt when they've up by 100,000.
Yeah. So yeah, usually it's not only just that they've you know, it's not that they might be paying the interest, Charlie, but it could be that the contract that they've got is that when the time is up, if they want to get their money back for whatever reason, then they can pull in the loan.
Yeah, I meant on the new property actually.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. No, they can never do that because the £100,000 that's borrowed is with one of the 9, soon to be 10 companies. That when they lend the money, there is no requirement to pay the money back until either the death of the second person, or they move into long-term care and then have to sell the property, and obviously the sale of the property would pay off the 100,000 or whatever it grown to.
And what about the interest on the?
So they have a choice. This is a game where we talk to the client, and the FCA encourage us to challenge the client with their income and expenditure, because if they can, they should pay the interest on £100,000 at 6% or 6.5%. It's about £500 a month. So if they've got the income and the reduced expenditure to pay that, then they should do it effectively. It then becomes an interest-only mortgage for the rest of their lives. Their property price grows, and when they have to sell the house, they only have the original 100,000 in this example that they pay back. But if they have no dependents and they don't want to pay the interest, then it would roll up on a compound basis. But there is always a no negative equity guarantee. So even if, let's say, worst case scenario, World War III ensues, interest rates go to 14%. Well, it doesn't matter because it's a fixed rate for life anyway. But the fact is, house prices go down, the interest on the mortgage compounds, and eventually the £100,000 loan 30 years later is 500,000. The house is worth 450,000. That 50,000 negative equity is written off, and that's the case with all equity release. So the actuaries calculate it so there's actually a huge margin, as you can imagine. They're never going to suffer that, really. So
when you're selling it to the customers, do you get of course the other people who are interested is the heirs, the errant son who suddenly rings you up when they've died. I didn't know you existed. So do you get them involved?
Always, as far as we can, we always get the family involved. We also make sure they have a will, because there are plenty of people we see where the clients say, "Oh, I've got a son, but I haven't spoken to him in 25 years. Actually, the £200,000 mortgage that you're going to clear was what I took out 10 years ago. I gave it to him to go into business." You can tell I've had this client, and he blew it all, and so he's had his lot, and he's going to get nothing. So we have another sister company called One Stop for Wills and Estate Planning with a fully qualified solicitor, and we encourage all our clients to get the will done, get an LPA done, and if they don't want their son to inherit anything, then it needs to be in black and white. Okay, so obviously the FCA jumped on me because it expects controlled growth in a sustainable way, not at the expense of quality, which we proved that we did that. And success is measured by client outcomes, not just the volume of business that's written. And in fact, on Consumer Duty reports, as you might know, you have to give all the detail of the clients that you saw where you didn't do equity release and explain why you didn't. And talking of Consumer Duty, if you go to the next slide, that takes us nicely onto that. So basically, firms must deliver, as you know, good customer outcomes. That is the prime reason for the FCA getting involved in the equity release business. They are concerned, especially with a firm like mine, where every advisor, and we've got 18 of them, are self-employed, dotted around the country. They would rather we were employed, working from one building with lots of managers jumping on them. But that isn't the model we run, as it is with hundreds and hundreds of companies. So, for example, they would like us to, for Consumer Duty, record all the calls. But they know that that is extremely expensive, as it is to go to 100% file checking, by the way. They don't seem to worry about costs. But yeah, we just want you to do it. So, but until it's mandatory, we won't be recording calls. Some of our advisors have call recording software, but most don't. But the key is that the clients must fully understand the products and the risks and the implications of what they're doing. And we must be able to clearly demonstrate obviously suitability and fair value, and we do an annual fair value assessment, which I'm sure a lot of people on this call also do. Yes, please. So advice, quality and sustainability. So alternatives must all be considered. Now, this is done in two ways. We use the AIR fact find, and on there, the fact find automatically, they do something called a CPE fact find, which is corporate partner enhanced, and all the alternatives. So could you borrow from family and friends? Could you downsize? Could you, are there any ways of government grants or funding for the new roof you want to put on, or whatever it is? We're also members, all 18 of us, of the Equity Release Council, and we use the Equity Release Council checklist, which we have to keep on file as well. And that obviously covers all the alternatives as well. We must make sure that rationale is clearly documented for every recommendation. As you probably know, with equity release, we have the additional qualification called this. We've all got CMAP, but we've got CERER, the Certificate of Regulation of Equity Release, or the equivalent. And
do you have to have that? If you practice?
You do have to have that for equity release, yes. So you can do mortgages for CMAP, but to do equity release, you need CERER or the equivalent.
Okay, because I know a lot of the attendees are considering.
I've got to tell you, if you can do CMAP, you could do CERER in 2 weeks. You're about a third. Honestly, you could a third of CMAP, the latest one, covers equity release, and that's about a third of it. It's very common sense. It doesn't go into the detail of the law and all of that CMAP goes into. So honestly, if you have a good knowledge of mortgages, you could probably do CERER in 2 weeks without being.
And so if you are thinking about going it, obviously you've got to get the exams. You've also got to get the experience. And how are you going to get the experience if you don't have the license?
The old catch-22, Charlie. Yeah, I mean, there are some big firms that will take on people. If you take the exam and you are, you're non-CAS, as we call it, competent advisor status, you fall into that status for equity release. So it's the same as anything else. You probably have to do, it depends on the company, between 6 and 10 cases. At least the first 3 are 100% checked. Very soon it'll be 100% of the 100% checked. but the first 3 to 6 cases are checked. As long as they come out as suitable, with no red markers or issues, then you can become CAS status, which means you can do it yourself. There are some companies that will take on a non-CAS person and work with them. We sort of pride ourselves that we only take on CAS people. However, we've just taken on somebody who does equity release, but also does mortgages, because you can go backwards rather than forwards, ironically. And we are setting up an ability so that we'll very soon be able to take on somebody, whether it be an AR or a registered individual, an RI, as a mortgage broker that can continue to do their mortgage work with us, but then start doing equity release as well. So that's the bridge that we're looking to go through in the next couple of months. So that's exciting times for us, because we want to get into mortgages, because Consumer Duty is good customer outcomes, and we want to be able to offer everything to a client.
I was going to quickly ask a potentially dangerous can of worms question, which we may save for another day, depending on how you feel about it. But a lot of our clients are, are offering financial advice as well as mortgages, or they'll have a specialist for both. And I know from conversation, currently very few will actually offer equity release, but they are looking into it. Is the feedback I'm getting? And again, without going down this blurry line too much, but in my previous life working with NFU Mutual and the financial advisors there was often the case for the recommendation to look at indebting yourself in equity release terms was because of later life planning, as they would put it as well. So in terms of inheritance tax planning, you can't, I presume you can't say that the recommendation is based only on that, of course. But is there a benefit? My long-winded question is there an inheritance tax benefit to looking at equity release as opposed to other or lack of options where you're going to give up 40% and off you go?
No. So you're right, because we will do equity release business on the basis that quite often people with a bit of wealth have an IFA, and we'll say we're not experts at inheritance tax mitigation. However, it doesn't take a genius to say if you've got a £1 million house and you take out £250,000 that you're going to gift 125,000 to each of the children, you've created a debt of 250. Your net estate's now 750,000, isn't it? And you know, the two children can go and put that chunky amount as a deposit on a house and get a much better rate. So they're in the property market. You've still got effectively £1 million in property. It's just some with your son and daughter and some with yourself, but with £250,000 debt, which needs to be cleared before, you know, inheritance tax is paid. So yes, that's very, very simplified, but we're working with IFAs and networks. And one of the things I'm looking to do, two things, is work on a business to business basis with IFAs and networks to say, look, you don't have to do the equity release, but if you identify it as a possible solution, we're going to have an equity release hot desk, and all you have to do is ring us up or email us and say, here's the client. There'll be a no cross-selling agreement. Obviously we only do equity release, so we'll just say, we will let you know whether we can help. If we can, we will pay you the commission, which is probably bigger than if you got 100% of doing a mortgage. So yeah, that's something that we'll be offering again soon.
Yeah, I think you were going to talk about vulnerable clients. Is that the next slide?
That's the next
because inheritance
slide.
tax planning presumably
So
is not about
I won't
vulnerable
go
clients.
on about it too much, because you've already shown we use BAT, of course, and the fantastic sort of questionnaire that's used, the 4 areas of health, life events, resilience, and capability. So over 55% of our clients have characteristics of vulnerable characteristics, which is quite a high percentage. The FCA's number one thing when they talk to us is prove to us that you're doing that correctly. Prove to us that we know roughly what percentage of your clients should be potentially vulnerable or vulnerable are yours. Prove it to us. So obviously we do the vulnerable testing, and we have to identify it and the signs of vulnerability more than most, which is fine. We have training all the time. We had a 1.5-hour session from Just Retirement only a week ago, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's one of those things that the FCA keep on tweaking what they're looking for. So we have to keep on tweaking what our knowledge is. But the key is that the advice that you give has to meet the individual needs of the customer, and you have to be able to prove that you can adapt the process to meet those needs. And then you have to, you know, clearly record what additional support you gave, what was provided, and why you gave it. And this can be, I'm not going to teach you on suck eggs, you know, it can be everything from large scale print or braille or speaking loudly, or as I had when I had some people whose English wasn't very good, their daughter, who was a solicitor, and her husband were not interpreters, but they were there to help their parents with their understanding of everything. So again, that brings in, if you can, you bring in family whenever you can to help with that.
It's just a question of recording it, isn't it? Somehow or other.
It is. So obviously
you
have to record it on the fact find, which is the key piece of element. That also then pulls through into the suitability report, and you know, those are your two cornerstones to make sure that you can prove that you did what you say you did. I'll move on, otherwise we're going to be here too long. So very quickly, and no one likes this, oversight and supervision. So IFAC do ours, which is absolutely fantastic. They are brilliant. They do an annual audit. We have a senior managers meeting every month, which Kirsty Turner attends. We use IFAC for file checking, which uses AI and is getting more and more used to using AI, which is great. Because of the 100% file checking, we've decided that we're going to have to implement our own, some additional file checking of our own internal file checking, which is fine to get up to 100%, but that's additional cost. But that's all in the mix at the moment. Competent supervision is the other thing the FCA are very keen on, especially with the self-employed sales force, and they need to make sure that the supervision or the supervisors are competent. So we have a supervisor's course for anyone that's going to go into that. As I mentioned, we already have a senior management meeting, and in the senior management meeting we use MI, and we talk about the MI from BAT. So we look at everything from file checks to financial promotions, through to financial exams, through to CPD and business mix, and everything. It's discussed at every single managers meeting. And they seem to be happy with that. So there you go. If we could go on to the next, which is linked to this, which is record keeping. So I've already mentioned this. You know, if it isn't documented, they don't want a tick box exercise, and if it isn't recorded, it didn't happen. a full audit trail is needed, and obviously every case that goes onto BAT, we have research, KFI, application, offer, fact find, suitability report, AML checks, proof of ID, yada, yada, yada. There's like 20 or 30 things that are attached. So that, though, gives you the full audit trail with a timeline from when you saw the client, when you did the research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way through. It's probably no different from a mortgage or anything that an IFA does. AI systems, well, that's already been covered really, but you know, AI is here to stay, and I'm delighted that BAT and IFAC have embraced it, and in fact I think are leading the way with AI systems. But you know, the FCA are coming around to the fact that, you know, if you do everything manually, it creates risk because you're going to make mistakes. AI doesn't make a mistake. The FCA expects evidence quickly. Charlie, you mentioned, I can't tell you how many emails I've had at Friday at 5 to 5 from the FCA. Thank you. Could we have this stuff in full by 5 p.m. next Tuesday? So they give you almost exactly 48 hours always. I can tell you that following a site visit they had with 4 people from the FCA, which by the way went brilliantly, we're waiting for their response. And obviously it's bank holiday weekend, and on Tuesday will be exactly 91 days or a quarter of a year since they came and said, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So we get 48 hours, they get quarter of a year. And so this is the way they work. I read too many Lee Child books of Jack Reacher, but I'll just send Jack Reacher in to sort them out. Anyway, we'll move on. So audit trails, again, maintain clear time-stacked records of activity, have a structured end-to-end advice journey. That's what they want, which should be visible. So when the FCA do contact us, they want the latest update on our client journey and the supervision and the hierarchy and the supervision. It just goes on and on. But they ask for the same things. On one occasion, they asked for the same thing 5 times. That's by the by. Just although they do know what they're doing. On
AI, I think on new applications to join or something, there's a AI generated set of questions but the last 5 we've submitted, we've had the same questions. So I think there's something wrong with their internal AI on the applications. That's applications to the FCA to do some trade or some activity.
Yeah. So in fact, you've just covered, if we go to the next slide and probably then almost straight on to the next one. So the next one's AI and quality assurance, and basically, you know, what it can do is flag missing information very quickly, which is great for a file check. It'll say we can't do it because it's incomplete. Identify patterns that potential risk of poor practice, and obviously shift QA from a reactive checking to a proactive risk prevention. So they're all the advantage of AI, but I think we know that. Quickly, consistency across advisors. I mentioned the FCA, they don't like the fact that they're self-employed. So one thing we did was we did have a couple of advisors charging slightly different client fees and different solicitors charging different solicitors fees. So now we've standardized the processes, we've standardized the fees, standardized the field, and obviously that reduced the risk of any variation. As I said, the FCA would prefer that I made them all employed, but that's never going to happen. That's by the by. Management information we've already covered because I'm conscious of time, so let's whisk through the last few very quickly. Responding to the FCA, yeah. Well, as you know, we do quarterly returns. Alistair Frame, who's not on the call, is brilliant, and he does nearly all of those. He's got a link into my Xero account, so he knows all the figures and gives them those, which is fantastic. What they're looking for is trends, of course. They are not looking, they want to see if you're massively increasing or decreasing. Decreasing is just as much a threat to them as increasing, because that's why I pay an FSCS fee, because if you go out of business, then you know they've got the risk of PI companies having to pay for any poor advice or complaints. Luckily, our PI went down 25% this year because we do such a great job, so that's fantastic. It's still tens of thousands of pounds a year, by the way, but it's still gone down, so that's great. At the end of the day, they want to know that you can demonstrate control. We've already sort of covered this. FCA proves proof of outcomes. They also want to make sure the data supports compliance. They want to make sure you're giving good customer outcomes. And we did demonstrate that when they came to the site visit, and they loved it. So that's the good news. So everyone can hear. I'll repeat that. They loved BAT. We said, we also do financial promotions on this. And they said, really? Because that was one of their big topics a couple of years ago. We said, yeah, look, you just do this and just do that. And they said, oh, that's fantastic. And they made a note. So thanks, guys. That was all good. If we go on to the next one, what good data looks like: basically no gaps in key information, standardization across all cases, easy to retrieve and review, and that you can drive decisions and improvement. So in other words, it's actionable. I'll go on to the next one, please. Thanks. Structured advice process. So the FCA wants to know your clear customer journey from end to end, from fact find through to recommendation. They want to make sure that nothing's overlooked, of course, and that compliance is embedded at every stage in the process. So what are you doing from the beginning of the client journey to the end of the client journey, which you have to prove, of course, which we do. Real-time oversight. So that's very, very simple. The FCA love root cause analysis. If something didn't go wrong, so what's the root cause analysis? Why did it go wrong? Why did you monitor that advisor? We have had one advisor fall out of CAS status to non-CAS because of file checks, and they're now just about to go back into CAS status. So it all seems to work very well, which is good. At the end of the day, take action before things escalate. Right, almost finished. Commercial benefits. So obviously, with us, rewards. I'm just looking at my notes.
Well,
so yeah,
the commission rates are very high, aren't they, on equity release?
Well, they are, and I think they might come down. So we're making hay while the sun shines. So just so you're aware, I mean, obviously our case is a lot smaller. So you might do a £250,000 or £200,000 mortgage. Ours is 50,000 or 30,000. But we also do 100,000 or 300,000 or even 500,000 cases. But we do have a cap on, most companies cap the proc fee at £10,000, and some go it to 20,000, but that's it. And you might think, wow, I wouldn't mind a cap of that. And the reason why it's capped is because on average our proc fee is 3%. So obviously, £330,000 at 3%, that's £10,000. So if you do a big case of 500,000 or even more, and some of our guys do cases of 700,000 or $1 million, which works out at about 0.75%, of course, because you just they're
do you get accused of people using the equity release route for higher commissions rather than the standard mortgage, which they might have been able to achieve the same outcome? Do you see any evidence of that?
I'll be honest, I don't. What we do is obviously we're checking for that all the time. I'm very fortunate that the 18 guys that work with me are all extremely experienced. I think I'm the 7th youngest, and I just turned 63. So the guys that are doing it are honourable gentlemen and ladies, but also even the younger people have got, I think our minimum is 3 years experience in equity release, or might even be 5 years. Our average in financial services is 26 years. But again, it doesn't matter what I know, it only matters what I can prove, which is why we've got all the systems in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But quite often it's self-evident, because they'll have to do a RIO, a retirement interest only mortgage, or a TO, term interest only mortgage, or even a later life lending with Family Building Society or something like that, where the rate is 0.35%. So the right thing has to be justified on the suitability report and the reasons why you're doing it or not doing it. But yes, there are commercial benefits in doing equity release, and that's why we're trying to get people. We're going to try and get people to dip their toe in the market by helping them, by saying that we can do it for you, but if you're interested in doing it, you can talk to us, and we are going to have a sort of hybrid role where they can continue to do their mortgage business, but also do some equity release business should they wish. Risk support data. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to ask Jason a question about.
I was about to do the same thing. We've had a question from the chair actually, which is from Charlie. But I think Charlie's asking in terms of what the very large firms or the smaller firms that we deal with in BAT, in terms of their requirements, so outside of equity release or including it sometimes. From experience with overall, they're almost always very, very similar in terms of what people want the system to do. Sure. And the practicalities of and equally, a lot of them have the same issues, as in, I can't tell the advisors to use another CRM. That's always a hot one, which we'll come to at the very end because we're taking steps as of next week, so they won't have to. But we do get, without development requests coming in, we do get some very large firms who want to use BAT to identify, just checking up on what their advisors have said in their mother CRM. But that is a pertinent piece for a big company we're dealing with now, is the advisor has said this in the CRM, do the outcomes, the actual sale outcomes match what they've said they were going to do in their initial, CRM entries. And the reality is that is the number one priority for a couple of companies, that we can actually quickly identify inconsistencies where you said you were doing it for this reason, and you said you were doing this product at this rate for this reason, but actually what you have done doesn't match. And it's not because they have an awful lot of advisors to check on is their main issue, rather than they've got a major issue across all of them. And the major appetite, I would argue, now has changed. Actually, we have almost everybody we deal with wants to do 100% initial data completeness checking, which was not the case when I started a year ago. So it's moved very rapidly, and that's probably driven from FCA requirement or what you can see coming down the road or internal issues, whatever the reason. But I'd say across all the firms that is now the number one consideration, is we want to check all the documentation as quickly as we can in real time where possible, which BAT obviously can do, for errors, inconsistencies, omissions, what's there that shouldn't, all of those things, and that across everybody, big or small, one-man bands even. There was an initial kickback, I was saying, from one-man bands who said, well, it's my work, I know what I've done, I don't need to check on myself. But now actually that appetite's changed as well, because they realise they're human, they're going to make mistakes. They've used an old formatted form and they forgot to change the date of birth or the name or the value or the percentage, and that happens more with mortgage advisors than anybody, I'd say. So again, that's to answer that question. Handing back to Craig.
So just to sum up the whole of this slide and exactly what you've been saying, Jason, I was given some advice 40 years ago when I joined as a IFA, over 40 years ago, and they said if you were in, and it was to do with selling insurance, because you'd see a young couple and they'd say, I don't want the life insurance, and you'd have to document it. And they said to me, if you were in court, do you have enough evidence to prove what you did was right? And that's exactly what sums up all of this. Poor data means you wouldn't be able to prove it. And I know the FCA, they look in the most minute data, incredibly detailed, and you need to have, if there's anything, it was one of the earlier slides, if you don't have it down, it didn't happen. So they'll just say, well, that's no defense.
There's a huge thing there. I've recently attended multiple events with the FCA where they are encouraging and enabling an enormously widespread international set of AI startups, all to do with finance and document checking like ours, because they will very rapidly get to the point and say, well, hang on a minute, if there are all of these technologies and ways of improving risk, the question very rapidly will be, and why aren't you using them? If you have problems and you choose to ignore, these systems, BAT or otherwise, that can help you, that is probably the biggest red flag will go up. Say, well, hang on, now it's a choice. So it's not to panic buy an AI system. It's not that. It's to research where your biggest issues are.
Yep.
Look at the market, see what the best possible solutions are, and go and do trials and see what helps. Sorry, Charlie.
And so I was just going to say, we're using AI and bots to improve our, all our lead generation, lead purchase. We use AI for that to keep clients warm and all of that. So AI is here to stay, obviously. Final takeaways. I mean, really, it's to sum up. Growth has to be controlled, because the FCA hates it where you just explode. You can use AI to protect the firm, which we just mentioned, and high quality data is not just compliance, it's actually a strategic asset, I think. And that's my last slide. You'll be delighted to see it 5 minutes too.
Perfect. What I would just, and that is a perfect segue actually into my final thoughts, as it were, not to be what was his name? Jeremy Carlebelt. But there's the quality of the data is completely reliant on the people putting the data in. It's as simple as that. So if you put nothing in, you'll get nothing out the back, and then you have a major data risk, and the FCA will treat it as such. This feeds nicely, and this isn't a sales push, I promise, and it's not live until next week, so you can try it then. But that will actually next week be able to remove that as a hurdle, because if the hard work has already gone into creating, a decent fact find and an illustration and all the documents that advisors will do before they even touch the CRM, which is often the case because they're using old forms and other systems. As of next week, that will operate the Keyless CRM and business book and compliance engine. So with effect, the advisors, admin, paraplanners, whomever it is, so sorry, we have paraplanners in the equity release market, but they would follow this simple process to simply upload the documents. Our OCR and AI engine will then strip the data out as it already does for compliance. But what it's now going to do is it will use that data to populate or update a new client CRM entry. It will guarantee not to duplicate an existing record, and it will just update if anything's changed, phone number, address, whatever. It will then go and create the business book entry, including the fees, the commissions, the values, the provider's details, everything that an advisor should go and put into a business book. And then for fun, it will do this, which is the compliance engine as well. So it will immediately go into the data analysis tool here to look at missing or valid, hopefully. Most of it should be green and valid, but it will pick up on errors, omissions, and everything at the first stage. So an inconsistency. So if you call the Mrs. Smith in the fact find, but Mr. Jones in the suitability letter, there's a problem, and you're just going to either look silly or embarrassed when it first happens. Or if it gets picked up by the FCA and they deem it to be misadvice, then you're in real trouble if it's something more significant. So this is a very hurried version of it in speed time, but that's something that will alleviate, as I say, the need of an advisor to use a secondary CRM, which none of them want to do, and no management is brave enough to ask them to do, if I'm honest. So, and equally means that when we do see advisors using it fully, they're still only putting in half the information or only the mandatory information, whereas using this system now will populate every single field it can do. And the cherry on the cake is what it will also do is pull all the data from every document it can to backfill an internal fact find document, which is already in the system, which a lot of you may already use. And there are specific ones for equity release as well. What that enables then, and this is on trial at the moment, so it won't be ready for a few more weeks, but with all the data in the VAT system, it will then allow for automatic generation of suitability letters for any kind of mortgage, equity release especially. So that is all of that automation will remove how many hours of work or de-risk the company, because you're not going to get incorrect entries being put in or inconsistencies across documents. So that's going to be, as I say, live next week. Still in trial phase at the moment, but it's working perfectly today. Fingers crossed. So without going into a full demo, I just thought it might be nice to see the actual process on the screen. Otherwise, that's it from me and from Craig. Final thoughts from Charlie, maybe? I think he had a question. Have you got another question, Joe?
Thanks very much, everyone. That's
there you
a
go.
great seminar. Thank you, Craig, for helping with that.
Yeah, thank you, Craig.
Most
and if you do need any more
All right,
information,
I send out the CPD certificates and all the rest of it. I know recording and so on in the automatically after this. And if you're a user of BAT, you get it up. You get the CPD uploaded automatically as BAT.